How do you bury a man who's still alive? The question hangs in the air, heavy and sharp, as neon lights flicker over rain-slicked streets in Tokyo. The city pulses with life beneath a relentless drizzle, each drop tapping against the pavement like a whispered secret. Here, in the maze of glowing signs and shadowed alleyways, criminals don't simply disappear. They vanish into new lives, carefully crafted and impossible to trace. This is a world where death can be an illusion and rebirth, a calculated masterpiece. In this cityscape, a man once stood at the apex of a deadly empire, a high-ranking Yakuza executive, known for his precision, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty. His presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Boardrooms thick with smoke and silence bore witness to his quiet authority. Decisions made with a cold efficiency that left no room for error. But one day that man ceased to exist, officially pronounced dead. Yet his disappearance was no failure, no desperate escape. It was the first stroke of a grand design. What followed was an operation executed with surgical accuracy. For 5 years, he slipped beneath the surface of the world's digital networks, erasing every trace of his former self while constructing a new identity, piece by piece. University degrees appeared in academic archives as if earned with years of study. A flawless employment history wove itself through corporate databases, each job a stepping stone in a meticulously planned ascent. Medical records aligned with a body that never breathed, a fabricated biography supported by an online presence curated with relentless precision. Government systems designed to verify truth accepted the illusion without question. The man who once commanded fear in the underworld dissolved into nothingness. In his place rose a polished, impeccable businessman, meticulous in appearance, unassailable in credentials, and untouchable in reputation. When he reemerged, it wasn't from hiding. He stepped onto the global stage as the CEO of a Japanese multinational, traveling freely across continents, shaking hands with world leaders, and managing empires that dwarfed those of his former life. Every connection was intentional, every detail engineered for maximum impact. His past was not remembered. It was deleted. But shadows, as the city knows too well, have long memories. Beneath the gleaming surface of his new existence, whispers of his old world begin to stir. The man who returned as a CEO was flawless, because the man he once was no longer existed. Something's shifting beneath the polished veneer, subtle cracks forming in the story he so carefully constructed. It's easy to believe the surface, the confident strides, the sharp suits, the commanding presence, but beneath it all, there's an undercurrent pulling at the edges of control. The shadows that once erased him aren't done yet. They're gathering, quiet and patient, waiting for the right moment to unravel the carefully woven facade. As you follow this unraveling, keep a close eye on the small details. Glances that last too long, conversations that hint at something unsaid. The deeper you go, the more you'll realize that what appears to be a clean slate is anything but. New layers emerge, each one revealing more about the man who thought he could outrun everything by becoming someone else entirely. Stick with this journey. There's more coming, and it's not just about what he's hiding, but about the forces that refuse to let him forget. The truth isn't static. It moves, twisting through the shadows, shaping everything he's built. It's a slow burn, and every moment counts. You won't want to miss what comes next. He wasn't the kind of man who thrived on brute force or reckless displays of power. Within the labyrinthine world of the Yakuza, his influence stemmed not from intimidation but from a rare mastery of logistics, finance, and diplomacy. As an executive orchestrating the syndicate's most delicate international negotiations, he operated with a precision that mirrored the corporate titans he secretly admired. The syndicate was a sprawling empire, but to him it was less a criminal organization and more an intricate network of alliances, contracts, and unspoken codes. A parallel universe where power was as much about information and influence as it was about loyalty or fear. In boardrooms hidden within Tokyo's neon haze, he balanced ledgers and brokered deals that spanned from the bustling ports in Southeast Asia to the shadowed back alleys of Europe. His role demanded a deep understanding of global markets, currency flows, and the subtle art of negotiating with counterparts who operated in the gray spaces between legality and outright criminality. Unlike many in the syndicate who reveled in the raw assertion of dominance, he preferred strategy and subtlety. Where others saw violence as the ultimate solution, he saw diplomacy as a tool to expand reach and secure stability. Yet beneath this veneer of power and control, he lived a life divided. His days were spent navigating the syndicate's complex political landscape, but his nights were consumed by a fascination with the corporate world, the architecture of identity, the mechanics of bureaucracies, and the invisible frameworks that govern society. To him, these systems were not walls but doors, each with locks that could be picked if one knew where to look. The duality was a constant tension. The man entrenched in the underworld's shifting alliances, and the man captivated by the ordered, rule-bound universe of government and business. This fascination was far from idle curiosity. Years before anyone in the syndicate suspected, he began a quiet, meticulous project, his secret plan for escape. It didn't involve sudden flight or dramatic betrayals, but a slow unraveling of his own existence as it was known. He immersed himself in the study of identity architecture, the ways personal histories are constructed, recorded, and authenticated. He pored over digital records, tracing the threads of bureaucratic systems, learning their blind spots, and understanding how they could be manipulated or bypassed. Government databases, immigration protocols, financial audits, these were not just obstacles but potential tools for reinvention. His approach was methodical. He recognized that while the syndicate demanded absolute loyalty and visibility among its members, the outside world relied on faceless systems that could be gamed by those who understood their inner workings. He mapped out the vulnerabilities in data collection, the inconsistencies in record-keeping, and the slow pace at which paper and digital processes merged. Every delay, every outdated protocol was an opening, a chance to rewrite his story without leaving a trace. He cultivated contacts in key bureaucratic positions, always under the guise of legitimate business dealings, while quietly assembling the pieces of a new identity. Despite the growing weight of his clandestine preparations, he maintained the illusion of unwavering commitment. His colleagues saw only the consummate professional, the executive who could be trusted to navigate the syndicate through turbulent waters. But behind closed doors, he wrestled with the paradox of his existence. Was he merely preparing to flee from the suffocating confines of his past, or was he laying the groundwork to transcend it entirely, to not just escape, but evolve into something beyond the reach of the syndicate's long shadow? In the quiet moments before dawn, as he reviewed the encrypted files outlining his plans, the question lingered like a whisper. Was he preparing to flee, or preparing to evolve? The disappearance was never meant to be a spectacle. No shooting in dark alleys, no frantic chases or bloodied streets. Just a quiet unraveling, a ghost slipping between the cracks of a world too eager to pin him down. He had learned early on that the loudest deaths attract the most unwanted attention. Instead, he chose silence, a slow erasure that would be nearly impossible to trace. The first step was a medical report, a routine hospital admission that ended with a technician's carefully forged signature and a cause of death that required no investigation. A sudden, untraceable cardiac arrest, the kind that closed file drawers and moved on without question. The cremation followed, a ceremony conducted in shadows. The ashes were labeled, bagged, and filed under a name he no longer owned. A distant relative, an actor hired for their part, placed the official notification call to the Yakuza elders, delivering the news with a calm voice rehearsed to perfection. They accepted it. It was exactly what they needed. In their world, a dead man was a silent one, a problem erased without residue. There were no loose ends, no whispers of betrayal to stir paranoia. His vanishing served them all, a tidy solution to a complicated knot. Behind the scenes, the dismantling of his identity was surgical. Tax records disappeared as if they had never existed, shredded from government databases through a network of corrupt contacts and digital cloaks. Every travel log was scrubbed clean. No flights, no trains, no border crossings that might connect him to his former self. Criminal ties, once painstakingly documented by law enforcement and rival gangs alike, were quietly expunged, the files reclassified or corrupted beyond recognition. Even his medical records, spanning decades of checkups and emergencies, vanished into the void, replaced by fabricated entries that pointed to a man who had faded away years before. His childhood files, perhaps the most stubborn traces of all, were erased with meticulous care. School records, birth certificates, photographs, even the faintest mention in municipal archives, all carefully removed or altered. It was as if the boy who had once run barefoot through narrow streets never existed. Each piece of paper, each byte of data, dissolved like mist under the dawn sun, leaving behind only silence. Watching him disappear was like witnessing a ghost unbind itself from the corporeal world. First, there was the fading outline, the slow dimming of a presence once so tangible. Then the absence, the hollow space where a man had lived, breathed, and fought, now filled with nothing but questions. No body, no grave, no story to tell. Just the faintest echo in the minds of those who knew him, a whisper of a life that had been quietly folded into the shadows. The Yakuza, pragmatic and ruthless, understood the value of this final act. His death, though fabricated, was a safeguard. Dead men don't talk, but ghosts never reveal their secrets either. To them, the silence was a shield, a pact sealed in shadows that ensured peace among enemies and kept the syndicate's fragile order intact. They agreed to the illusion, knowing it protected their interests as much as it severed his ties to a past that threatened to consume him. In those final moments before vanishing, he didn't just shed an identity. He dissolved into a new existence, one unmarked and untouchable. Like smoke slipping through fingers, he became an enigma, a story erased before it could be told. The man who had been hunted, cornered, and broken was no more. What remained was a ghost, free at last, drifting beyond reach in the quiet spaces where death never truly happened. In the shadows where he disappeared, the man began constructing something far more intricate than a mere alias. He was engineering a life from scratch, pixel by pixel, byte by byte. The world he entered was no longer physical but digital, a vast expanse where reality could be molded with keystrokes and encrypted code. For 5 years, he submerged himself in this underground rebirth, a digital architect crafting not just a new name but an entire existence that could withstand scrutiny from any angle. He started with the foundations, university transcripts. Drawing from stolen databases of prestigious institutions, he forged impeccable academic records, grades that told of quiet excellence, rigorous coursework, degrees earned with merit. Each transcript was tailored to fit seamlessly with the rest of his fabricated biography. These documents were never static files. They were integrated into alumni databases, their codes altered to embed his name among real graduates, ensuring he would surface as a verified member in any background check. This was not mere forgery. It was surgical implantation into systems designed to detect fraud. His past career was a patchwork of legitimate employment logs pulled from compromised corporate servers. He pieced together a professional timeline that spanned industries and cities, each job supported by detailed HR files, pay stubs, performance reviews, and even colleague testimonials created through carefully orchestrated email exchanges with fictional mentors. These mentors weren't just names. They had inboxes, social media profiles, and histories of interactions with him, complete with advice, encouragement, and subtle references to shared projects. Every detail was cross-referenced, tested against automated verification algorithms, and adjusted until it passed as authentic. Travel history was another layer of his design. Forged visas, digital scans of boarding passes, hotel receipts, all created using stolen airline and hospitality databases, formed a rich tapestry of movement across continents. These records served a dual purpose. They painted the portrait of a worldly, experienced individual and left digital footprints that corresponded with timestamps in his employment and social records. This constant, deliberate alignment of data points made it impossible to separate fact from fabrication. Medical checkups, however, posed a different challenge. Hospitals and clinics maintained some of the most secure records, yet through persistent infiltration of healthcare provider networks, he planted fabricated electronic health records. Routine blood work, annual physicals, vaccination records, none of which had ever happened in reality, yet all stored in the encrypted vaults of trusted medical institutions. These records became critical insurance against background screenings and health-related inquiries, completing the illusion of a real, living body behind the network of information. On social media, he curated an existence that felt authentic without ever revealing too much. Photos were subtly altered to avoid facial recognition, locations tagged with plausible but untraceable coordinates, interactions carefully scripted to mimic the ebb and flow of real friendships and professional connections. Posts reflected hobbies, opinions, and milestones aligned perfectly with his fabricated background, each interaction generating a cascade of digital signals that reinforced his presence as a genuine human being. The final stroke was the dispersion of digital footprints across multiple platforms, from obscure forums to mainstream professional networks. Comments, likes, shares, and private messages, all planted with precision to create a web of activity that could be traced back with ease but never contradicted. His persona was layered, nuanced, and deeply embedded within countless systems, making extraction or exposure a near impossibility. Behind this intricate construction was the silent theft of corporate databases, vaults of data from companies he breached and exited without leaving a trace. These stolen troves supplied the raw materials for his identity's architecture, allowing him to blend into legitimate networks as if born into them. It was a quiet coup, a conquest without violence, where information was the weapon and invisibility the prize. He didn't fake a life, he engineered one. Stepping into the bustling lobby of a global consulting firm in Tokyo, he exuded an unshakable calm. The polished marble floors reflected the steady click of his polished shoes, each step measured, deliberate, a silent echo of the discipline ingrained during his Yakuza years. His new identity was impeccable, crafted from the stolen fragments of countless corporate histories, but it was more than just a flawless background. It was a carefully honed presence that commanded attention without demanding it. His sharp gaze scanned the room, reading the subtle shifts in posture and expression of those around him, instantly assessing allies, rivals, and the unspoken dynamics at play. Within hours of submitting his application, he received an offer that others only dreamt of: a role consulting on international logistics for one of Japan's most prestigious firms. The hiring manager saw a candidate with no blemishes on his record, a resume that spoke of flawless execution, and a demeanor that radiated confidence and control. What they didn't see was the man behind the mask, the one who had navigated a shadowed world where precision was not just valued but necessary for survival. His work was meticulous. Every project was approached with the same strategic rigor that once orchestrated complex, covert operations. His ability to anticipate problems before they arose, to maneuver through corporate bureaucracy like a seasoned tactician, quickly set him apart. His charisma was subtle but potent. In meetings, he listened more than he spoke, absorbing nuances that others missed. When he did speak, his words were concise, charged with an authority that inspired trust and respect. Colleagues found themselves drawn to his quiet intensity, sensing a leader who understood not just the mechanics of business but the human elements that drove decision-making. He could read a room with uncanny accuracy, detecting hesitation, gauging ambition, and adapting his approach to each individual. It was a skill forged in the underworld, now translated seamlessly into boardrooms and conference calls. Promotions followed with remarkable speed. Each new responsibility was met with the same unwavering focus and discipline that had defined his past life. He streamlined operations, optimized supply chains, and implemented security protocols that shielded sensitive information from cyber threats, an echo of the digital warfare he once waged from the shadows. His innovative strategies not only increased profits but also enhanced the company's reputation for reliability and integrity. To his peers, he was a visionary. To his competitors, a formidable adversary. Years passed, and the ascent continued. At the helm of a multinational corporation specializing in logistics, the very kind of enterprise whose networks he had once manipulated from the shadows, he found a profound sense of irony. This was no mere coincidence. It was the closing of a perfect circle. The man who had once controlled clandestine routes for illicit goods now commanded legitimate channels that spanned continents. Under his leadership, the company expanded its global footprint, pioneering sustainable practices and leveraging cutting-edge technology to redefine the industry. Despite his rise, he remained vigilant, never forgetting the lessons etched into his psyche by his past. Every decision was calculated, every alliance scrutinized. Yet, beneath the veneer of corporate success, he carried the quiet strength of a man who had survived darkness and emerged not broken but reborn. His journey was not just about power or prestige. It was a testament to transformation, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of mastery over one's destiny. In a world where shadows and light intertwined, he had become both a master of the game and the architect of his own redemption. He understood from the start that erasing the past was not a matter of simple choice but a daily act of discipline, a constant negotiation between who he was and who he needed to become. The past, with all its raw edges and dangerous ties, was a phantom that threatened to unravel the fragile construct of his new life. To maintain the illusion, he meticulously avoided the places that once defined him, the dimly lit backstreets where deals were whispered, the cramped bars echoing with the laughter and threats of comrades long gone, the neighborhoods where his name still hung in the air like a warning. Every step away from those territories was a step deeper into anonymity, a deliberate severing of roots that once anchored him to a world he no longer belonged to. His speech became a tool of reinvention. The sharp, clipped patterns of his old life, laced with slang and coded phrases, were replaced by measured, neutral tones. It was more than habit. It was survival. He trained himself to mask the cadence that could betray him, to avoid expressions that might spark recognition or suspicion. It was exhausting, a constant mental exercise in self-censorship, but necessary. Language was identity, and by reshaping his voice, he reshaped the very essence of who he was perceived to be. Tattoos, once worn like badges of honor and loyalty, became a dangerous liability. He concealed them beneath long sleeves and high collars, even in the heat of summer. Public spaces demanded invisibility, a blending into the faceless crowd where no one looked twice. Each hidden mark was a secret memory, a silent reminder of battles fought and allegiances sworn, now locked away beneath skin and fabric. In this new existence, the absence of visible tattoos was a barrier against recognition, yet it also felt like erasing fragments of himself, an unsettling compromise that deepened the internal conflict. Distance was his shield. He kept far from criminal territories and old associates, understanding that proximity risked exposure. The streets he once walked with confidence now seemed alien, hostile even. Avoiding these spaces meant relinquishing more than geography. It meant letting go of the familiar rhythms of his past life. Yet, the farther he moved, the more the past clung to him like a shadow, longer and heavier with every attempt to outrun it. But the greatest battle was within. The psychological tension of living as a man who ostensibly never existed was relentless. He often asked himself, when you erase a life, do echoes ever really disappear? The answer was no. Memories, guilt, and longing reverberated in the quiet moments, disrupting the fragile peace he sought. Every reflection in a window, every whispered fragment of an old song, every chance encounter with a face reminiscent of his past echoed like a ghost, a reminder that erasure was never complete. This internal pressure built steadily, a silent storm beneath the surface. The need to remain vigilant, to suppress instinct and emotion, weighed heavily. Nights were the hardest, alone with thoughts that refused to be silenced, haunted by the man he once was and the one he now had to be. The paradox of his existence was stark. To live freely, he had to live as if he had never lived at all. Yet, the more he tried to vanish, the more the past imprinted itself on his psyche, a shadow stretching just beyond reach. In this delicate balance between disappearance and survival, he forged his new identity, not by replacing who he was, but by mastering how he was perceived. The illusion was his armor and his prison, a necessary guise to protect the fragile life he had rebuilt. And though the echoes never fully faded, he learned to listen without letting them break the silence he so desperately needed. The room buzzed with polite conversation and the hum of distant translators, but his attention was elsewhere. He stood near a polished window, the international summit unfolding behind him like a carefully choreographed dance. Delegates in sharp suits exchanged greetings, their smiles practiced, their words measured. Yet, in the sea of faces, one figure anchored his gaze. A man who moved with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never known fear, whose presence seemed too deliberate, too controlled. He blinked, forcing himself to focus. The man's features were familiar, too familiar. A flash of memory stirred, sharp as a knife's edge. Years ago, in a darker life, he had seen faces like that. Cold eyes that hid storms, a jaw set against impossible odds. But this man, the CEO of a rising multinational conglomerate, was a ghost in a different guise. His background was pristine, his ascent rapid and unblemished. It didn't add up. Unease settled deep in his chest, a weight heavier than regret or nostalgia. Something was off, but the world around him refused to acknowledge it. No one whispered of shadows lurking behind the CEO's spotless record. No one dared suggest that the man standing there might not be who he claimed to be. But he had seen death close enough to recognize when it was merely an illusion. He slipped away from the crowd, the summit's orchestrated gaiety fading as he retreated into the sterile quiet of the adjacent lounge. His fingers traced the edge of a sleek tablet, already pulling up databases, news archives, anything that might unravel the carefully constructed narrative. Patterns emerged, subtle but unmistakable. Gaps in timelines, inconsistencies in stories, a background too perfect to be true. The CEO's name appeared in headlines only recently, his rise meteoric yet curiously devoid of the usual scars left by corporate battles. The deeper he dug, the more he suspected. This wasn't just coincidence or luck. This was a resurrection. He remembered the final moments, the ones everyone else had buried beneath layers of silence and lies. The man they all believed dead, erased from existence, had somehow slipped through the cracks of the past and reemerged with a new identity, a new life forged in shadows. No obituary could explain away the phantom presence now commanding boardrooms and international conferences. No official record could deny the truth his instincts screamed. Someone had returned from the dead. His breath slowed, pulse steadying even as adrenaline prickled at his skin. This knowledge was a dangerous spark. It could ignite a fire that no one was prepared to face. But he had to confirm it. He had to find proof. The summit's glittering facade masked something far darker. A secret buried beneath layers of deception. A story rewritten by those who refused to accept finality. He tapped into discrete networks, tracing connections that led to quiet corners of the underworld and whispered rumors among corporate spies. Each piece fit together like a puzzle designed to confound. But he was patient, methodical. Time had taught him how to wait, how to watch without being seen. In the shadows, the mist thickened, an invisible threat weaving through the corridors of power. It wasn't just the CEO's past that was in question. It was everything that depended on that past staying buried. The balance was fragile, and the one mist that threatened everything was no accident. It was a reckoning waiting to unfold. He folded the tablet closed, eyes narrowing. The game had changed. Now, the question wasn't just who the man really was, but how far he would go to protect the illusion, and what cost the truth would demand. The corporate investigators moved like shadows through the gleaming halls of the multinational conglomerate. Their footsteps silent, but their presence deeply felt. They were experts at parsing data, reading between lines of encrypted communication, and tracing digital ghosts left behind by those who believed they were invisible. Each fragment they uncovered, an obscure transaction here, a veiled email there, hinted at something larger, a hidden architecture of influence and deception. Yet none of these shards formed a complete picture. The CEO was cocooned within layers of obfuscation, a fortress not built of stone but of algorithms, legal loopholes, and psychological misdirection. Across the Pacific, Yakuza lieutenants convened in dimly lit backrooms, their conversation a low hum of frustration and calculation. The syndicate had long been masters of territory and loyalty, of control through fear and tradition. But this CEO was an enigma, a ghost whose identity seemed deliberately erased. The Yakuza's intelligence networks, usually unmatched in precision and reach, found only partial truths, an alias here, a fabricated history there, but never the man himself. To them, this was not just a missing puzzle piece. It was a challenge to their very notion of ownership and power. How do you claim a man who has no past? How do you bind him when his roots have been severed? Meanwhile, foreign intelligence operatives watched from afar, their interest piqued by the subtle ripples reaching across global markets and diplomatic channels. They understood the stakes transcended corporate espionage or organized crime. The CEO was a linchpin in a delicate geopolitical balance, and his anonymity was both a shield and a weapon. Their agents gathered fragments, classified reports, intercepted communications, whispers from informants, but always incomplete, always obscured by layers of deception and counterintelligence. The lines between ally and adversary blurred, each side wary of revealing too much, fearing that the smallest misstep could unravel their own carefully constructed narratives. Within this intricate web, the CEO remained a phantom presence, his true self buried beneath a labyrinth of digital safeguards and psychological veils. The systems protecting him were designed not just to thwart physical threats, but to outthink any adversary. Artificial intelligence algorithms monitored patterns of intrusion, adaptive firewalls reconfigured in real time, and a cadre of loyal operatives embedded in both corporate and personal spheres. This was a security apparatus far beyond the muscle and intimidation tactics the Yakuza wielded, a chess game played simultaneously on countless boards. Ownership of a man without a past became a philosophical and practical dilemma. The corporation claimed rights through contracts and proprietary technology, asserting control by weaving the CEO into a corporate identity that could be bought, sold, or discarded at will. The syndicate sought dominion through tradition and shared history, believing loyalty and bloodlines defined allegiance. Yet, the man himself hovered in the balance, a cipher whose autonomy was both his greatest weapon and his deepest vulnerability. Was he merely a pawn, a product engineered for strategic advantage? Or could he reclaim his narrative, forging a self beyond the confines imposed by others? As the three worlds, corporate, criminal, and intelligence, maneuvered in a silent battle of wits, every move was met with countermove, every revelation with deeper concealment. The CEO's past, erased or fabricated, became a battleground not fought with guns, but with information, trust, and deception. In this high-stakes game, the ultimate question was not who held the man, but who could define him, and whether he would ever answer to anyone at all. He didn't run from the Yakuza because he was scared of what they might do to him. Fear is a weak motivator for someone like him, someone who had long since been shaped by violence and shadow deals. No, the truth was far more complicated, more deeply rooted in a desire that the syndicate could never satisfy. He wanted something the Yakuza could never offer: legitimacy. A clean name that wasn't whispered behind closed doors or carried with a warning glance. A life where his face didn't have to be concealed, where his presence could command respect without the threat of a blade or the weight of a secret. In the world he left behind, power was measured in fear and loyalty enforced with blood. But power in that form is fragile and fleeting. It is a currency that corrodes the soul and chains its bearer to a life of endless running and hiding. He craved permanence, the kind of power that comes not from intimidation, but from genuine admiration and trust. He wanted a legacy that could stand in the light, not dissolve in the dark. The tragic irony is that to become that man, the one respected in boardrooms rather than back alleys, he had to kill the man he once was. Not literally, but in every way that mattered. His past had to be erased, buried so deep beneath layers of fabricated stories and half-truths that even he sometimes struggled to recall where the lines blurred. The name he carried now was carefully constructed, a mask worn so long it had merged with his skin. Every step forward meant stepping away from memories, from relationships, from the very identity that had forged him in the crucible of shadow crimes. He understood that those who admired him today would recoil if they glimpsed the man he had been, the one who survived by trust in no one but himself, whose hands were stained with deeds that could never be undone. To protect the fragile new life he was building, he had no choice but to sever those ties completely. No calls home, no lingering in old haunts, no chance for the ghosts of his past to catch up and drag him back into the darkness. This self-imposed exile was a prison in itself, one without bars but no less confining. The freedom he sought demanded sacrifice and silence. He learned to live with the ache of isolation, with the knowledge that the price of legitimacy was loneliness. Yet, even in that solitude, there was a strange comfort, a certainty that the man he was had finally found a place where he could be seen not as a shadowy figure, but as a force to be reckoned with on terms he chose. He wasn't running from fear. He was running toward something greater. A name spoken with respect, a life lived openly, a legacy not built on whispers or threats, but on the undeniable strength of a man who had conquered both his past and himself. The cost was high, but in the end, it was the only way he could truly become someone the world would admire, and that was worth every sacrifice. The night swallows the city whole, folding its secrets into alleys where light never dares to linger. In the quiet that follows the storm of revelation, what remains is neither victory nor defeat, but a fragile silence. A silence born of truths too heavy for the daylight. He stepped out of the shadows not to escape, but to claim a place that had always been waiting, hidden beneath layers of fear and forgotten names. This was no triumphant return. It was a quiet reckoning, a measured breath after years spent running from ghosts that only he could see. There is a certain coldness in the aftermath, a stillness that cuts deeper than any blade. The world moves on, indifferent as ever, while the man who once vanished into obscurity now stands exposed, stripped of disguise yet armored by hard-won resilience. His story is not one of redemption written in grand gestures, but of survival etched in subtle acts, a life rebuilt not from ashes but from the shadows themselves. The legacy he sought was never about glory. It was about existence, about carving a path so undeniable that even the darkest corners had no choice but to acknowledge his presence. And yet, beneath the surface of this new dawn, an unsettling question lingers. What price does a man pay to outrun himself? How many lives must be left behind for one to be reborn? In the quiet moments, when the world's noise settles to a faint echo, the past whispers back, reminding us that shadows never truly disappear. They evolve, shift, and sometimes they return. If stories like this keep you awake at night, powerful men, hidden identities, and lives rebuilt from the shadows, then subscribe now. Shadow Crimes reveals the worlds the public never sees, and the legends born in silence. Turn on notifications because the next file we open might be someone who died years ago. And tell me, how many people walking beside us were reborn from another life?